To those who know me even just a little, it will be no surprise that I have formal training in drama, or theatrics, as someone would call it. Since the Cormack Symposium has allowed me, in all innocence, the unusual privilege of talking about the particular idiosyncrasies of my teaching, I'd like to seize this opportunity to discuss how my very minimal and patchy training as a theater actor, Sarah, please switch off your brain straight away, influences the methodologies I employ in my own classroom. There is nothing original at all in my suggesting that the teacher is a performance artist. Even a cursory glance at the pedagogic literature on teaching and learning will throw up absolutely dozens of pieces invoking the connection between the art of the live performer and the art of teaching. I think you press enter. Right. So the analogies are fairly self-intuitive. Both involve audience engagement, having an influence on the performative environment, voice modulation, stage presence, originality. And can you press enter again? Very importantly, as Dylan, in case you didn't know, said, know your song well before you sing it, which is subject mastery. And I really believe that that is the foundation to all of this, to any good performance. These material linkages are, however, not the only connections to be drawn. To me, being an effective teacher has always meant having a lasting impact on my students. In other words, effecting transformation. Just click return again. Yeah, thank you. So, admittedly, I can very easily influence transformation by transforming them into coma patients, by droning on and on, which was often my experience as an undergraduate. And you might, many of you might remember the world leader in this particular practice. How many people remember where this is from? Yes, see, this is why the history department wins all the time. The Mr. Whatever in Ferris Bueller, whose style of engagement was anyone, 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 and that's it. But I choose, I hope, to induce transformation through influencing the way my students know and experience themselves and the world. In the language of pedagogy, this is perception transformation. To me, such transformation is best achieved by engineering these interconnected relationships. So relationships of equality based on empathy, trust, and understanding between the learners themselves, between the teacher, me, between and amongst the learners, with the material at hand or the subject or the topic that we're dealing with, and its applicability to the wider world outside. This is the kind of interconnected circuit, which is the model I always use in every single classroom. I think in all honesty, being able to create these relationships, to sustain them and nurture them, is at the core of whatever success I have experienced as a teacher. And in my endeavor to invite and nurture these interconnected relationships, I find that the actor's craft proves a rather helpful instrument. Today, I'm just going to take very little time to talk about 3 strategies drawn from very basic actor training, which I use in some of my classes. Mask work. This is a pretty common acting exercise, drawn from both. What's interesting for me is it's drawn both from method acting, but it's also very popular in clown school. So there's a wide spectrum to how you can use mask work. So what mask work does is it's geared to stretching our conceptual muscles to trigger both discovery of the self and discovery of the other. And I don't really need to labor the point to tell you how vitally important this is in a history classroom. There are innumerable ways to deploy mask work techniques. Whatever strategy you use, mask work increases the range of mobility and the flexibility with which one might be able to slip into or between a range of characters, ideas, which on the surface may seem either impenetrable or just impossible to relate to, let alone study with any depth. Now, I teach modern South Asian history to students at SFU who have very little scholarly exposure, either at the school level or at the university level, to the region in any period. Mask work helps me a great deal in getting my students to familiarize themselves with the historical artifacts of a world that is very distant from them. Exploring the way the masks we don ourselves as people define, extend, and in some ways limit our emotional and physical self-portrayal, as well as the freedom which a mask could give us to explore and express parts of ourselves which we might otherwise feel inhibited about displaying in public, provides very good fodder for interesting class discussions. This semester, I'm using historical scholarship on Islamophobia to apply mask work. In inspecting and responding to the power of masks, our class considers how the appearance of masks might affect how people, our families, our friends, other instructors, their own colleagues, and even in some instances we talk about a journalist interviewing us on the road randomly after yet another terrorist attack somewhere, perceives us while we wear these masks, and how we can exploit the switching from mask to present different qualities and attitudes we want to explore ourselves. This often provides a great platform to segue into discussions of what scholarly objectivity means, how far is it possible, what social construction means, and how the student can be self-reflexive in their own historical writing. Now, the course that I'm speaking of is a level 2 course. So many of these ideas come as, I think the best way to put it is bombshells to my students. So I find that when we're doing it through these kind of metaphorical masks, talking about it in that way, the discussion becomes a lot more genuine and honest. I feel like they're really getting the tools to apply this from their experiences to their reading. Through these discussions on how human beings are put together, really cobbled together in this way, all human beings, at all times and places, the artificial barriers that separate us from those who are superficially different from us begin to crumble in the classroom. And the student begins to integrate their own identity with the people they're studying about with me. At first in their imaginations, and then, at least potentially, in their scholarly appreciation of the lived realities of other people in other places. The other method that I use is building a construction zone, which uses this 4C method: connecting, contributing, collaborating, and communicating. This is an activity whose impulse is derived from the fundamental rule of improvisation, which is you say yes and you roll with it. I use this framework to work with students to develop a class contract for meeting educational objectives that are usually difficult to identify, let alone assess, such as rules for classroom participation. Now, I'll explain why this is very important for me, because I almost always allocate a high percentage of marks, almost 20% of the total assessment, to class participation. So the stakes for students to be invested in this are obvious from the start. This technique becomes very interesting when dealing with lower level history classes, which have few or no history majors, also frequently a large percentage of international students. In this mix, for students who find that they might lose their voices because for whatever the reason, they do not share the lingua franca of the classroom setting, which may be a well-be standard English, but also when they lack any training in the humanities, in reading, writing, presenting, whatever that may be, this activity gives each student the option to make powerful connections with other students, with me, and with the outcomes of the course itself. They become internal stakeholders rather than passive recipients of a rubric constructed elsewhere. I sort my class into small groups, and each group has the task of coming up with 2 to 3 rules through this construction zone process. So in their small groups, each person contributes ideas. Everyone has to say yes to each person's idea, and together collaboratively come up with 2 to 3 rules. Just to give you some examples of what this process has recently thrown up. These are some of the collaborative rules that have come up and deal with how we're going to assess class participation. One of these is a student may ask another student to translate their responses in class, so from one language to English. And secondly, if a student provides independent study assistance to another student outside of class hours, this will count towards participation credit. The students, both students involved, will send me a report of such study sessions. And finally, process drama. Now, I find that process drama is becoming increasingly popular in high school classrooms of late. I found that it's a great alternative to conventional role-playing exercises in classrooms because, frankly, it takes away the sheer embarrassment of it. They don't have to indulge in full character immersion, which a student once described to me as torture by humiliation. In this theater technique, the instigator or the director of the drama, in this instance me, the teacher, lays out a simple scenario for a kind of indirect role-playing. Indirect because really it is the teacher only who is indulging in any kind of role-playing. The others solve the issue. Excuse me, I'll explain how. By assuming a character who has a particular conflict with which she needs assistance. In effect then, process drama provides a format for problem solving which requires group participation. It's a purely collaborative form of drama in which no predetermined outcome is to be reached. In a course on Islamic India this semester, the one I referred to, the level 2-1, I assumed the character of a 14th century Bengali Hindu prostitute confused with the complex legal changes brought about by the then conservatively Sunni Muslim Delhi Sultanate, of which she is a reluctant subject. I describe my situation in terms of a specific decision or action which needs to be made by the other participants involved, my students. In this instance, my attempts to obtain a landlord's license have been failing repeatedly. If this is not resolved, I will be homeless very soon. No other details are made explicit, they don't need to be. There are no role definitions assigned, and the location of the action is the only other detail suggested. Calcutta in this instance, the easternmost outpost of the Delhi Sultanate, and the course of the action to be taken by the performers or the students is left entirely to their own discretion. There's only one strict guideline, which is that they have to be very vigilant about the historical context or situational authenticity. So they can come up with a range of solutions, come up with a range of ideas. They can don whatever role they choose, whichever one they please, as long as it's effective within a feasible historical context. Once they do this, I collect their ideas and provide verbal feedback on its feasibility or lack thereof through discussing the historical context within which our problem was situated. Students also get a chance to comment constructively on other students' ideas, and this is where our participation rules, which I mentioned before, kick in. So in conclusion, I'd like to point out the simple fact which is at the root of all of this. It's a lot of fun. That's just it. It's a lot of fun bringing in these theater techniques to my teaching practice. Excuse me. There are obvious, compelling pedagogic payoffs to stepping outside the text through creative means. Thanks very much. Too much coffee. To constructing historic empathy, self-reflection, collegiality, scholarly rigor, amongst other things. But alongside this, it helps alleviate work-related fatigue. And it stops, to an extent, and it stops any sense of monotony from setting in. And fun, I think in most cases, is rather therapeutic. The fact that I can freely impersonate a prostitute to a room full of eager faces taking notes who are going to roll with it and carry the story forward fills me with a sense of enormous well-being. It makes my heart smile. And a smiling heart in any profession is quite a handy thing to possess. So this is where I'll conclude, and thank you very much for listening. I'm happy to answer any questions, and I invite your comments. Thanks.